guys, it's your boy Luke here for our weekly course breakdown, this time for the Arnold Palmer Invitational. It's up in Orlando, Florida. We got Bay Hill Club and Lodge this week, which is another hard but prolific golf course that I love seeing year in and year out after last week's Honda Classic, which first off, the Honda was a ton of fun, was there for all 4 days. The monsoon on hole 18 was definitely non-expected. I mean, Berger and Lowry definitely got the short end of the stick there, but congrats to Sepp Straka, anyone out there that backed him. If you guys in the Discord were able to hit on that outright, which I definitely didn't have my eye on, but anyone that was able to take advantage, definitely a really solid hit. I mean, 140 or 160 to 1, whatever you guys ended up getting. Pretty insane stuff right there. This week, we do have another tough golf course, though. For as much carnage as we saw at the Honda Classic, we might see even more this week. Even though Bay Hill is a par 72, is routinely one of the hardest golf courses on tour in terms of relation to par. In fact, the scoring average last year was close to 74 on some days, and in years past, it's been even higher than that. That's why we see a cut line here between 2 and 4 over par. Historically, the best we've ever seen is 1 under par, so an outlier would be under par here. So we saw an over par cut last week, probably likely to see it once again here at Bay Hill. Another part that really makes this golf tournament in particular one of my favorites is the field is just so much stronger. Of course, at the Honda Classic, it's a natural resting spot for a lot of people as they get acclimated to Florida, want to take a week off before traveling across the country. But here, when we're at Arnie's tournament, you're going to get the very best in the world. Now, it's not quite what we had at Riviera, what we had over there at Torrey Pines even, but is well above average for a golf tournament. You have guys like Jon Rahm, Rory McIlroy, past champions like Terrell Hatton as well, Mark Leishman, all in the field. So looking forward to the field this week. Of course, another venue that should bring the absolute goods for us. So a lot to break down. Here in this video, we're going to be covering the field for this event, a little bit of the cut line, some of the tournament specifics. We're going to go through the course in complete detail, including a hole-by-hole analysis, my key stats for analysis this week here at Bay Hill, and some comp courses I'm using as well. So whether you're a DFS player, somebody who's placing outrights this week, or just a golf fan in general, you're going to be completely equipped with everything you guys need to know for this week. So with that being said, let's go ahead and hop right on into it. Real quickly to start, we'll go over the field for this week. So it's an invitational field. 120 golfers will be teeing it up. Unfortunately, we will be without last year's champ, Bryson DeChambeau, who, with his wrist and back injuries, needs at least another few weeks to recover from that. So hopefully that goes well for him. But he was last year's champ at 11 under par. A few other champions over the years. We had Terrell Hatton win the year before that at 4 under par. Molinari won back there in 2019 at -12. Rory won at -18, and Leishman and Day won at 11 and 17 under par respectively. What you can tell from those numbers is that there's a wide range here. You have 4 under par for Terrell Hatton, where of course we had some difficult conditions, a ton of wind. Then you have guys like Jason Day and Rory McIlroy who won at 17 and 18 under par. Of course, the wind was much lower that week. That's why we saw the winning scores that we did. But that is something to take note of. We're going to have to keep an eye on the forecast as we get closer to Thursday, because if there is wind in play, this place could play much closer to major championship level conditions than what we're used to seeing here, especially in the Rory and Day years. Some other notables in the field include Jon Rahm, we have Hideki Matsuyama, Scotty Scheffler, Will Zalatoris, Sungjae Im, just a ton of the best players in the world. Maybe more notably are the guys that aren't here, like a JT, a DJ, a Jordan Spieth, guys that won't be making it. I guess I'm assuming they need a week off trying to get prepared for the Players' Championship. And of course, a lot of those guys we're more than likely to see at the Valspar Championship the week after the Players. So a lot of the guys that we're not seeing this week, you can probably look forward to seeing them at the Valspar. The cut line will be the top 65 in ties. It's historically between 2 and 4 over par, like I said during the intro, and the scoring average, which is heavily dependent on wind. Over the years, it's usually very close to 74. Sometimes it's above 74, particularly when it's windy, and when we have easier years, it might play closer to a 73 or even lower than that, and somewhere in the 72 range. The years where Rory McIlroy and Jason Day took it to nearly 20 under par, those are the type of scoring averages that we saw. So much like PGA National, it's really hard to tell you how this course is going to play before we have any type of a wind forecast, but it will be somewhere in that 72 to 74.5 range, no matter the type of conditions that we have out there. All right, and now hopping into the course details, we have Bay Hill Club and Lodge, which is in Orlando, Florida, a par 72 setup with 4 par 5s, 4 par 3s, and of course your regular allotment of par 4s on the docket. The one thing of note here, especially with the par 3s, is that there are some really long iron shots required. The average par 3 here is 212 yards, and even on some of these par 4s that may seem short, that may only be about 400 to 450 yards, because there are so many forced layups here at Bay Hill Club and Lodge, you're hitting a ton of irons in that 200 plus yard range. In fact, 38% of all shots last year on approach were in the 200 plus yard range. It's by far the highest number you see on the PGA Tour, even longer than some of these extremely long golf courses like what you have at Kiawah Island. It's just the setup, a lot of the strategy that goes into play at Bay Hill that dictates that these long irons are so important. And of course, these par 3s also have plenty of hazards around them, whether it's water, of course, the infamous bunkering that we have here at Bay Hill. It really makes this golf course an absolute brute. That's really why we see the scoring average where it is because no matter how good you are on approach, hitting a green from 180 plus yards, especially 200 plus yards, is difficult for anyone, and putting it close is nearly impossible. So over the years, the best iron players on tour are the guys that have had success here. You know, a lot of the champions that we saw on that recent champions list are guys that can get extremely hot with the iron play, but maybe most telling is that Tiger Woods has won this event 8 times, and there's no better iron player in the history of our game. So that really should tell you everything you need to know there. It's a 7,454 yard golf course, but like I said before, it plays much longer than that. In reality, it has a true distance of something closer to 77, even 7,800 yards. First off, all those forced layups mean that it's going to play longer with effective distance. And on top of that, you're also dealing with a ton of dog legs in both directions. You have that infamous 6th hole, which is the crescent moon around the lake. That's actually a par 5. It's such a forced layup type of situation. And that's really the key factor with Bay Hill. That's why experience here matters. That's why we've seen plenty of guys have success at this golf course and are able to parlay that year after year because there's so much strategy involved. The guys that are particularly skilled at golf course management always tend to succeed here. And another thing that Tiger Woods was known for over the years, of course, was the mental side of the game. So no surprise that he's really been so dominant here. This is a Dick Wilson design. The greens are Bermuda grass. They are Tiff Eagle Bermuda grass. It's what we would expect down here at a Florida track. And the players always rave about these greens. They're always extremely pure. And Rory McIlroy has been quoted as saying that if you get the ball started online with the correct speed, it's going to go in out more often than not, which you would hope for. But of course, these PGA Tour players, they are such perfectionists. Any minute little difference on the green or any imperfection is going to throw them off. So it's good to see that these greens are always running pure. The fairways and the rough are also Bermuda grass. And the one thing to really note here is the rough. Here at API, here at Bay Hill, they love to let the rough grow. Usually it's at least 3 inches to start the week, if not longer, sometimes closer to 4 inches. And by the week's end, could be closer to 5, even 5.5 inches. And when we have Bermuda grass, particularly really lush Florida Bermuda grass, you're going to see a huge penalty, sometimes even half a stroke penalty out of that type of rough. In fact, the only golf course last year where you saw a more penal rough was at the US Open. So that should really tell you everything you need to know about this rough. They love getting it out there, which you would think puts a huge priority on getting the ball in the fairway, but there's also a huge priority to just getting the ball out there in general, having a high club head speed. First off, if you're closer to the green when you're in that lush rough, you're going to be dealing with a much more lofted club, which is also a lot easier to hit out of that lush rough. But you're also going to be dealing with higher club head speed with that club itself. And the guys that swing harder, that are stronger in general, don't deal with nearly the same type of penalty out of that type of rough. So whether you're super accurate off the tee or you're somebody that just bludgeons it out there like a Bryson DeChambeau en route to his win last year, you have to be good off the tee. In fact, it's my #1 key stat this week. So we're going to touch on that here in a little bit, but now we're going to go hole by hole, talk about some of the strategy that's in play here at Bay Hill and really what's going to differentiate these players when it comes Sunday. All right, on the screen, you can see the Pro Visualizer tool, and we're going to go hole by hole showing you some of the strategy in play. On hole number 1, it is a little bit of a handshake. It's not really the most difficult shot, especially off the first tee. You have a choice whether to lay up in this massive part of the fairway here. It's right about 260 yards. It does leave you a little bit of a longer approach shot, right around 200 yards into the first green. But if you're trying to play it safe, make sure you're getting out with a par, could be the move. You're going to see a lot of the bombers though, and a recurring theme of this video is going to be the advantages you can get from bombing the golf ball. You can see if you get it out there at least 300 yards, which a majority of the field will be able to, you just have a little bit of an 8-9 iron in, right? Maybe even a pitching wedge for some of these elite bomber players, which could make the first hole a birdie hole. So depending on how aggressive you want to be, it could either be a very easy par, or of course, something you try to take advantage of and get one under par for your first hole, because hole number 2 immediately tries to take it back from you. It's a 227 yard par 3. You can see it's slightly uphill. You can see it's 1 meter uphill. You do have a raised green surface here as well. And if you take a look at some of the sloping on this green, first off, it's sloped from back left to front right. You have the bunker right in front of the green. And if they put the pin over here in the front right, it could play under par just because, of course, it's much closer to a 190 yard shot. Also not dealing with the bunkers in play. But if they put the pin just over this front bunker or even there in the back right, it's going to cause absolute havoc. You could see a scoring average of close to 0.5 or even 0.75 shots over par. So one of the more difficult holes on the golf course, and like I said, they give you that easy opening hole, but come and try and take it right back on hole number 2. And hole number 3 is no exception to that. It's also a very difficult par 4. You see there's water all the way down the left for your tee shot, so any type of a mishit, any overdraw of the golf ball, you're looking at the very best of trying to make a par here. But if you can get the ball in the fairway, I'm assuming a lot of people will take driving irons off this tee, just try and get it into the fairway. Have a mid iron in, right? Something like a 7 or an 8 iron, maybe a 6 iron for some of the shorter hitters on tour. So as long as you're keeping it out of the water, this is a birdie hole. You can see the angle you get from pushing it out here, 280, 290 yards, is excellent into this green. If you're a little bit more conservative off the tee, it does start to bring the water into play, right? The farther back you are here, the more water you have to carry, the more you have to challenge that water to get it close to some of those back left pin locations, which on Sunday is exactly where we'll see that. Now for our first par 5 on the docket, this is probably the easiest hole you're going to have on this front 9. It is a relatively long hole, but you're not dealing with all that many hazards. You do have a few bunkers down the left, but as long as you avoid those, you do have a realistic shot at potentially getting down in 2. So with a 320 yard drive, because you're dealing with downwind typically on this hole, hole number 4 typically is playing down the trade wind, you can get it out there pretty good, right? You're gonna have 250 yards into the green, probably playing closer to 230 yards. And because there's not a whole lot of bunkering up there, you can see there's one about 40 yards short of the green. You could very well run shots up onto the surface. So we have seen eagles at this hole before, but really only the bombers are going to be doing that, right? The guys that are only getting it out there 290, 300 yards at the very most, it's going to be difficult for them to hit a 3-wood onto the surface. Whereas guys like Bryson DeChambeau last year were hitting things like 5 iron into it, which is a lot more reasonable. It's why he was able to have such an advantage last year, and where a lot of the length that some of these bombers have starts to come into play. And now, even though we have a short hole here with hole number 5, do not be tricked. This is a very tricky hole. It's only 382 yards. But because of the bunkering here, you pretty much have no place to bail out, right? If you end up bailing out with a little bit of a slice, you're going to lose that distance and you're going to end up in this bunker over here. And if you end up overcooking it, getting a little bit of extra distance on a draw, you're going to end up in this bunker. Really, the guys that have the biggest advantage here are lefties, which are a huge minority in this field. Of course, you get that opposite effect. You know, a slice would end up over here in the rough, a more pulled shot would end up in the fairway over here on the far right. So they do have a little bit of an advantage on this hole, but from a design perspective, it's perfect in my opinion. If you take a look at the green up here, it's got plenty of bunkering. It's not a raised surface, so it's one of the few greens here at Bay Hill where you're not dealing with a ton of difficulty in getting up and down. But because of those fairway bunkers, it's not as easy as a hole as you would expect it to be on paper, and only the truly elite distance players are going to be able to take this bunker out of play. You can see to get it out here, it's at least a 300 yard carry, and of course a lot of people that try to take this bunker out of play are just going to end up over here on the right in these trees, so it's not really all that much better. Hole number 6 is that infamous par 5 that Bryson DeChambeau went and just decided to drive the green. And to give you an idea of where he hit it, right, his target was over here at this bunker. He actually ended up running it through the fairway over here, a 360 yard carry. To get it over the water, it's a little bit less than that. You can see the actual true carry is 350 yards. But outside of Rory McIlroy, maybe Jon Rahm, if he really took a mighty lash at the golf ball, I don't see many people going for it. You're going to need perfect conditions. It's going to have to be downwind for a lot of those guys to bring on that type of risk. but it definitely, was exposed last year. People were able to see what Bryson DeChambeau did, but a majority of players here are going to have to lay up over here in the fat part of the fairway, which is a massive difference from where Bryson was. You can see if we zoom out here a little bit, I mean, this is a massive hole, right? We're really zoomed in here. If we take a look, I mean, he's way over here. You can see the difference between our first shot and our second shot is a whole 180-yard difference. So this, of course, is one of the holes where if you have that extra distance, you can take advantage of that. But there's only going to be 3, maybe 4 players in the entire field that will even give it a second thought. Next up, we have the shortest par 3 on the golf course, and it's still almost 200 yards, 197 yards. It has a ton of bunkering around it. It's a raised surface. It's one of the more difficult greens on the golf course to putt. So even though it is less than 200 yards, it is one of the more difficult par 3s. So don't let that trick you. It is a tricky hole. So that birdie that you're likely to get on that par 5, also very likely to give it back there at number 7. Hole number 8 is as typical a hole as we're going to get here at Bay Hill. The tee shot's difficult because a lot of the shots that run through the fairway are going to end up in that fairway bunker, which you can see leaves a very difficult second. You're hitting over water. Any type of a fat mishit out of this bunker is definitely going to end up in the water. So a lot of guys that hit it through the fairway here, you're going to see them lay up. Just hit a wedge out here in front of this lake. Try to get up and down with a wedge for par. So it's a difficult hole here. If you hit it in the fairway, you're only dealing with a 170-yard shot. But of course, that water plays a ton of tricks on these players' minds. On the back nine, you're going to see a lot more water in play than what we saw on the front nine. And this lake right here is just an example of exactly that. Hole number 9, the last stretch here of the first set of 9 holes, is a relatively long par 4. It's almost 500 yards. Bombers tend to have a lot of success here just because, of course, you're dealing with a much shorter club into the green, but a lot of the field is going to make bogey here. It is one of the largest greens on the golf course, but because it's so long, holding it isn't a guarantee. I mean, this is one of the firmest, fastest golf courses that you're going to see all year. A lot of Florida courses, of course, tend to play that type of way, but with the type of build out they have here, the reputation that Bay Hill has for these firm, fast conditions, hitting a long iron into even the largest of greens isn't a guarantee. And now for the back nine, like I said, this is where we start to see a little bit more hazards in play. Also, it tends to get a little bit more difficult here. And while we had holes like number 1 on the front nine that are extremely gettable, that 380-yard par 4, on the back nine, that's not going to be the case because you can see even though this hole is only just 400 yards, it's an absolute brute. I mean, take a look at this tee shot here. You have fairway caddy cornered by fairway bunkers on either side. So you can see this is only a 235-yard shot. But if you try and be aggressive here, you really try and get it up there near the green. First off, it's a completely blind shot over this corner. All of these trees block out your view, and you're not guaranteed to end up in the fairway. A lot of tee shots will end up bounding through the fairway here into this rough. And like I mentioned before, the rough here is gnarly. This angle onto the green over those bunkers isn't ideal as well. So as a result, most people will be laying up. You're going to see a majority of people just leaving it in front of the bunker here, which leaves you a mid-iron into this green, which, again, the hole on paper looks like an easy hole, but it plays much more difficult than you would expect. Hole number 11 is very similar. You have the water down the left. This is one of the hardest tee shots on the golf course because the longer you take it down here, the thinner and thinner this fairway gets. Your second shot isn't all that much easier because the more conservative you play, the farther you lay back off the tee, the more inherent risk you bring on your second shot. You can see the angle gets much more difficult, especially if you're laying up right around 270 yards. The longer hitters on tour, the people that are more aggressive off the tee, of course, if you can get out here right around 300 yards, 320 yards, you leave yourself an angle over dry land, which is a huge deal for these tour players. It adds a lot of confidence for them. So again, another hole where distance matters. Next up, we have hole number 12. It's a long par 5, plenty of bunkers out there to go up there and swallow shots. So even though the par 5 on the front nine, I believe is hole number 4, was relatively gettable, you're going to see eagles from time to time, you are not going to see eagles here at 12. It's just a little bit too long. You have plenty of bunkers to grab golf balls, and getting it to run up onto this green is impossible because of them, right? You'd have to hit the perfect shot. You'd have to hit it in this little gully right here, hope you don't get a bounce to the left or the right, and it gets through that little bit of a gap. You just don't see it very often. Mostly players will lay up to this stake that you see right here, which leaves right around a flip wedge in, right? 80, 90 yards. Players will expect to get up and down from there at the very least. So it's not an eagle hole, but it definitely is a birdie hole at the very least. Next up, we have another short par 5. But this one's not really drivable. Unless you're Bryson DeChambeau and you're willing to take on a lot of risk, because it is surrounded by water on all directions of the green, that is, not really worth the risk here. Most players are just going to hit a hybrid off the tee, leave themselves a pitching wedge in, and even though you do have water in front, this isn't the hardest green to read. It's not the most undulated that we have here on the golf course, so if you're putting yourself to 5 to 10 feet, you can definitely make a birdie here. The problem is that players that are too aggressive, of course the pin location isn't going to be in the middle of the green. It's more likely going to be front left. You're going to see it over here in the back right as well. It's going to be a huge risk reward hole. I would expect most players to just lay up, hit it in the middle of the fairway, and then bail out to the middle of the green right where that first stake was. It's not really a hole that you're looking to take advantage of unless you're on Saturday or Sunday way behind the 8 ball looking to vault yourself up the leaderboard. Then it might be something that you go ahead and try and take on. Hole number 14 is another brute of a par 3. You can see it's 212 yards. It's got plenty of bunkering. This is a more difficult green on this golf course as well. So even if you put the ball close, no guarantee you're going to make that putt. Hole number 15, a 473-yard par 4. It's a dog leg right. You have that bunker on the front right, which will catch any mishit off the tee. And if you end up hitting it in there, you're at the very best making bogey. You're going to be laying up in front of those bunkers right there, just trying to get up and down, maybe save a par at best. But one thing you'll see about this green is, first off, it's very well protected. It's also a very undulated green. You can even see it here on the satellite imagery. It's much higher there in the back than the front. And you have roll-off areas over here to the right, which is making chips over here to a right pin location almost impossible. And the same thing over here on the left. There's a ton of slope going off of the green in either direction. So depending on where they put the pin, I mean, they can put it here in the back left, and it's a horrible location for these guys. Even the very front pin location right here, because of the false front, it's no guarantee either. It's definitely the easiest pin location of the bunch, but pretty much no matter where they put the pin here, it's going to cause these players trouble. And now we have hole 16, which is the shortest par 5 of the bunch. So if you're going to make an eagle, perhaps this is the most realistic opportunity to do so. We did have one hole in the front 9 where that's possible, but a majority of the eagles at this golf course come here just because of the length, right? It's only 511 yards, but it's no guarantee. You still have water in front of the green. You're dealing with a ton of chip off areas, like with the last hole, undulating from right here off the green into this fairway, over back right, front left, and of course over there on the right side. Just very difficult chips to get up and down, and unless you hit the perfect long iron shot, it's very hard to hold this green. So even though there are eagles that are made here, it's not like it's easy. You're only looking at right around a 4.5% eagle rate. Hole 17 is the last par 3 on the schedule. It's 223 yards. Extremely difficult, right? You got the water in front, bunkers all around, one of the hardest greens on the golf course. You are just hoping to get by with a par here. You'd be very happy with the par here. The scoring average is typically almost half a stroke over par. And now finally, hole 18, 463-yard par 4. You got water the whole way down the right. The water isn't really in play. You can see that even some of the longer hitters that get it out there, we're up 310 yards, these still have a good amount of room out here. So unless you're Bryson DeChambeau, Rory McIlroy, you're not really going to bring this water into play. And I would imagine a lot of those guys just try to smash a 3-wood off the tee, right? You know, they're probably going to get it out there about 300 yards rather than 310, which still leaves them with only 166 into the green. Now, one thing I'll say is, no matter how far you hit that first shot, your shot into this green is going to be difficult. I mean, you have a lot of water over here that comes into play. You have the bunkers down the left. So no matter where you end up trying to bail out here, you're going to find trouble. So you just have to execute a golf shot. Of course, the pin location on Sunday is going to be back here in the back right, which is just a devilish, almost unfair type of pin location. All right, now that we have an idea of how these players will be taking this place apart, let's talk about some of my key stats for analysis in my modeling. First off, we have shots gained off the tee, and probably got bored of me hearing about the power advantage that some of these guys are going to have, but it's extremely apparent, particularly when we take this place apart hole by hole. When you have that little bit of extra boom in the bat, you can take a lot of these hazards out of play. And of course, on that hole 6, where we have that par 5 where you can drive it over the water, it's even more so important. So shots gained off the tee, something I'm taking a heavy look at, but it's not just the power off the tee that's a huge advantage this week. Like I said before, this rough is gnarly. It's 3.5 to 5 inch Bermuda grass rough, which is the gnarliest stuff that you're going to get on tour, particularly when it's the Tiff Eagle Bermuda grass that we get down here in South Florida. It's also really important to hit it in the fairway. So guys that are accurate off the tee, whether you're getting it done with that power or the accuracy, ideally both, is going to be how you can separate yourself from the field. When guys like Rory McIlroy, Jason Day took this place to 17, 18 under par, they did it by being immaculate drivers of the golf ball. Of course, both of them bombers by nature, but also more than capable of keeping the ball in play. And when they play their best golf, there are no better drivers in the world. So it's no surprise to see that those guys won the golf tournament. But of course, Bryson DeChambeau last year, he showed the opposite. He went out there and just bludgeoned the place to death. Just got it out there with his distance. Did not matter at all if he was in the rough, because with his strength, with that club head speed, he has a much less of an impact than some of these shorter hitters on tour. So whether you're getting it done with the power or the accuracy, you need to be able to get it done in at least one of the two categories. And again, the guys that can do both things, like a Rory McIlroy or a Jon Rahm that we're both going to have this week, that is going to be a huge advantage for them. Next up, we have shots gained approach. And really, these number 1 and 2 stats are just so much higher than every other key stat, even in my modeling this week. You're looking at over 68% of my modeling just on these two stats alone. And it's very similar to the Honda Classic, where the guys that are the best ball strikers are just going to have the best weeks. A lot of the hazards, a lot of the high scores out there are when you're not precise and when you're missing wildly. Of course, at the PGA National, with all the water off the tee and even into these greens, any miss was just exaggerated, and that's a very similar effect to what we have at Bay Hill. Like I said before, water in play in 9 of the 18 holes, but you're also dealing with extremely penal hazards, whether it's sand bunkers, some of the chipping areas around these greens at Bay Hill. When you miss, you're going to feel it. You're going to have a very difficult time saving par. So the guys that aren't putting themselves in these bad positions to begin with are the guys that succeed. And really, to see this type of effect, just look at the shots gained of the guys that finished in the top 10 at the Honda Classic. Almost none of them were huge gainers around the green. There were only 1 or 2, like a Kurt Kitayama, that was a little bit of an outlier. But really, the guys that got it done at the Honda Classic were the guys that keep themselves out of trouble. And of course, we're going to get to our comp courses here in a second. The PGA National is by far the most comparable course on all the PGA Tour to what we have here at Bay Hill. Lastly, we have shots gained putting on Bermuda grass. And like I mentioned before, this TIFF Eagle Bermuda grass is extremely grainy, very similar to what we saw at PGA National, what we'll see at TPC Sawgrass, over there at Innisbrook for the Valspar Championship. And when you have all this grain in play, the guys that have a lot of success on Bermuda are going to have even more success. It helps players with their reads. It hurts players with their reads when they have no idea how to read the grain. So you're going to see a lot of polarization. It's very similar to a Poa Onua. Bermuda grass, it makes the better putters on the surface even better. And the guys that tend to struggle a whole lot on the surface. So that is something I'll be keeping an eye on. A few other stats I'm taking a look at. First off, driving accuracy. So of course, we're factoring that in with shots gained off the tee, but taking a little bit of an extra look at accuracy, something I'll be doing. I'm also taking a look at bogey avoidance. I'm also taking a heavy look at shots gained at Bay Hill. This is by far one of the most correlated courses to recent form and past history at this course that we've seen. You really want guys that are coming in with good course history, but also coming in with good recent form. So recent form over the last 24 measured rounds, also something that I'm factoring a little bit more this week than I usually do for a normal golf tournament. A few other key stats we're taking a look at: par 5 scoring. Rory McIlroy and Jason Day said the keys to their success in their wins, of course, was going in there and taking care of the par 5s. And another key stat that we'll be taking a look at is shots gained putting on lightning fast greens. The greens here typically run at a 13 and a half on the stint meter, which is even faster than what we saw at the Honda Classic. The soil up there in mid-Florida, closer to Orlando, is a little bit harder than what we have in South Florida. Of course, the further south in Florida you go, the lower elevation that you get. It gets further and further below sea level, which means that the soil there has more moisture in it, right? So the golf courses up there in Orlando that are built at a little bit higher of elevation, of course, towards the center of the state as well. The further towards the coastline you get, also the lower elevation that you have, obviously. So you do see a little bit of that effect there. Another stat that I'm looking at is shots gained in windy conditions. So much like what we saw at PGA National, guys that have had success in the past in really windy conditions, and at least how I classify those is over 20 miles an hour on average for the day. All right, and now for some comp courses. Number 1 and 2 are the golf tournament that we saw last week, PGA National, and what we're seeing next week, TPC Sawgrass. This 3-week stretch of golf, I think it's important to note, is by far the most correlated stretch of golf that we have on the PGA Tour. I think a close second might be what we have for Torrey Pines. Also, we get up there at Pebble, a few of the other golf tournaments there on the West Coast. But these 3 golf tournaments down here in South Florida, they're almost carbon copies of each other. I mean, not all that long. I mean, the longest of the golf courses, of course, going to be Bay Hill, but a ton of water in play, usually really windy conditions, that grainy Bermuda grass surface, and a huge emphasis on the ball striking numbers. So that's exactly what we get at PGA National, the champion course, over there at the stadium course at TPC Sawgrass, which is why they're my number 1 and number 2 comp courses. Something to note as well is that recent form, guys that can get hot down here in Florida, we see that almost every single year. So we had a few people last week surprise at PGA National. I'm likely to go and try and ride that form. I mean, this is the stretch of golf every single year where we see guys like a Sunjay M go off and go on a really hot stretch of golf. Last year, that was Lee Westwood. There's that one guy every single year. So I think that's something to note is, of course, because these courses are so correlated, they happen in such close proximity to each other, it's more than reasonable for somebody to go on a hot run of golf here. Another golf course I'm taking a look at is Riviera Country Club. Of course, that is over there on the West Coast. You're dealing with a different green surface. You're also dealing with just a different track, not really any water in play there at Riviera Country Club. Very little, if anything. But in terms of its difficulty, the scoring average, I mean, it's a par 72, relatively difficult golf course. Actually, par 71, sorry about that. It really fits that type of bill. The guys that tend to have success at Riviera Country Club, we've also seen have success at this venue in the past, which isn't a surprise. Both are invitational events. Again, both relatively difficult golf courses with really strong fields. That is all I've got for this week's course breakdown. Before you go on and get out of here, go ahead and let me know down in the comments what you guys think the winning score is going to be. Personally, I'm going to be taking 13 under par. I expect there to be at least one really windy day this weekend, but it's a little bit too early to tell, so I'll go with 13 under. But I would love to hear from you guys down below. If you think it's going to be extremely windy this weekend, maybe take something in the single digit range, or if you think there's going to be pristine conditions, I could see it going as whole the way low, maybe to 17 or 18 under par. Either way though, would love to hear from you guys. We're going to have even more golf content dropping throughout the week, so look forward to that. It'll be fantasy content dropping this afternoon. We'll have our weekly DFS live stream on Wednesday, prize picks content, showdown content. Got you guys covered from all the angles for this event. Of course, next week at the Player Championship, much like at the Honda Classic, I will be there in person. I'm planning on going there for all 4 days, potentially even the practice round there on Wednesday. So look forward to all the reports from the golf course. Very similar insight to what you saw at the Honda Classic. I'm really looking forward to this week though at the API. I was considering going up for the golf tournament. I think I need a week off though. A week to recharge between the players because I'm also very likely going to be at the Valspar for all 4 days. So I'm going to give myself this week off from going to the golf tournaments, but really looking forward to the players next week and of course the Valspar the week after that.